Donc l'équipe ont préparé une formation sur mesure. Lina a parlé avec les gens du MFRC qui ont accepté de venir vous parler des services disponibles dans votre région. Quand on regarde au niveau des problématiques, par exemple, que ce soit l'anxiété, que ce soit où on regarde au niveau des particularités peut-être pour les familles militaires et puis peut-être d'autres défis que ce que les familles en Ottawa peuvent vivre aussi. Donc l'idée c'était de bricoler une formation sur mesure puis vous permettre justement ensuite de ça de bâtir et accroître la capacité de votre école.
Mais aussi vous présenter un petit peu, vous parler de mon choix de pourquoi j'ai arrêté sur les MFRC. La présentation va être majoritairement ou en partie en anglais, parce que les services en français dans Trenton et les environs, comme vous savez, c'est pas très large.
But I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you're allowing us to come into your school. The indicators for each of these diagnoses are from the DSM-4, which is a diagnostic manual that psychologists, that psychiatrists use when they're giving an adult or an adolescent, or certainly a child in some cases, a certain diagnosis for treatment purposes, okay? These are in no way intended for lay people to think that they can diagnose a child, okay, or an adolescent, or some other adult. So please know that I'm going to give you the information. I want you to put it kind of in your mind so that you can think, you know, little Johnny has one or two of those traits that that lady talked about. Maybe we should talk. It's more about your awareness of some of these identifiers for mental health than it is anything about putting a label on the child, okay? Because sometimes in our society we do that a little bit too generously. Because I just want you to have kind of an overview of them, all right? So attention deficit, so here are some of the identifiers. Now remember, in the diagnostic manual, it talks about you need several of these in order to diagnose a child with this disorder. It isn't a child who has one or two, okay? There could be something else going on in that child's life that has some of these behaviors. But, so it's the attention piece, certainly important. Having the ability to sustain on a specific task for any length of time. Certainly organization of their tasks, very important. And again, because you all work in a certain age category, remember you're looking at children kind of in a normal range for that age group, okay? And easily distracted and forgetful. So these are the children who perpetually are forgetting homework, or forgetting their code, or forgetting the message, things like this. Okay, so the hyperactivity and the impulsivity. The impulsivity, huge. Kelly works with a lot of children, teaching them red light, green light, yellow light, okay, to teach them to slow down so that they can make better choices and that kind of thing. So the fidgeting, squirming, on the go, seems to have the endless energy. Oh, wouldn't we love to have a bit of their energy, some of these hyperactive children, and talks incessantly. Not me. Yes?
Are we going to have a copy of this?
Absolutely, I can give you a copy. I did probably, with trauma survivors in children, this is one that I see a lot of. Children are very, very, very fearful and inappropriately fearful, right? We don't want children to have no fear, but we certainly don't want to have them have so much fear that it kind of makes them incapable of their learning process, of taking chances on the playground, of making new friends, etc. So these are some very, very common, I would say, components of the anxiety disorders that we see. Depression. You know, we have, some children have just very low affect or low energy. That's their personality. That is not a diagnosis of depression. But 30 children in a classroom, and you have, you know, one or two are the quiet ones who, you know, don't really, you know, jump around and yell and scream and do that common thing. It doesn't mean they're depressed. It could just be their personality, that they're a little more common, quiet personalities. So what we look for as far as the diagnosis, is depression that is uncharacteristic of their behaviors. So someone who was jumping around and really interacting well with peers and that kind of thing, now they're very quiet and they're very over there to themselves. And you notice this behavior going on, and you maybe say to little Johnny or little Susie, is everything okay? And they don't want to talk about it. So you say, okay, you let me know when you want to talk about it. And on activities, they're fun activities, not math class, but fun activities.
Math is fun.
Sorry,
Math is very fun.
Who's the math teacher? I apologize. Okay. A child who you can't learn and make sense of things in a classroom, how do you behave? Everybody else gets it, you don't get it. You misbehave, you see? So when the teacher got this information, the teacher was able to, as only teachers do, know how to help her with the sequential rhythm of different pieces of the learning. Everything changed around for this little girl. Okay? Was it perfect? No, it was not perfect. She had had these behavioral traits for, you know, a lot of research is being done on this to figure out, okay, what is causing the upsurge in children being diagnosed with Asperger's or autism, and the jury's still out as far as I know. They haven't really been able to figure this out. So there are three main criteria. So we're going to talk about autism first, or autistic disorder. So the social impairment is something that, now remember too, that all of these diagnoses are on a continuum. Okay? So you may have a child, and I'm sure you've seen this certainly in the work you do, children who have severe ADHD or severe autism, to the other side who are more in the Asperger's range, right? So remember that all of these are on a continuum. So it's not like way over here, you have to be way over here to get the diagnosis, or way over here and you don't have any diagnosis. They tend to be on a bit of a range, which comes out in the testing that's done by psychologists. Okay, so the impairment around peers certainly causes tremendous damage to self-esteem and self-worth of these children. You know, the social aspect is one of the biggest challenges there. The communication challenge, I was a TA, and when we lived in Colorado, I'm a military spouse, so I've been everywhere, man. But so the communication and the inability really to be a child, with a child in the fantasy and make-believe at a similar range to their peers. Sets of Fire has conduct disorder though. Okay? The stealing, violations of rules, it is something that needs to be addressed again to sift through all the other pieces of the puzzle that make up that child and his or her life to really be able to identify, is it actually conduct disorder, or is it a few other components that are kind of leading the child to some of these behaviors? Okay. I would say this is extremely rare. Extremely rare. This one is not rare. This one is actually much more common. So the pattern must last more than 6 months. So you can have somebody who's out of sorts a bit, and you know, one day is pretty compliant, the next day very oppositional, and maybe oppositional for a little bit of time. We see this a lot in children who mom or dad is deployed, and there's a tremendous amount of worry about mom or dad's safety, a tremendous amount of worry about who does what now in the family at home. If mom or dad, whoever the parent who is still home, is not handling that deployment and being home alone very well, the child will have the symptoms that sometimes look like this, okay? And sometimes this is a cover for some of those anxiety things that I talked to you about earlier. This is the cover. I'll just act all mean and tough, and then you won't know how darn scared I am. You don't want that kind of behavior to get pattern formed. either at school or at home, right? So it's not something you say, oh, well, we'll let little Johnny act like this while his dad's deployed for 6 months, because goodness knows, maybe it won't switch back, because this will get ingrained. And the thing about anger, you know, because this has a lot of telltale signs of the emotion of anger, anger can be pretty powerful, right? You scare the you-know-what's it out of your friends or out of people you don't like, or maybe even your teacher. That becomes a kind of a power high a bit for kids. So I don't like it to go unaddressed. I like it to be addressed. I like it to be something that we have a good communication about, that we talk about, you know, how, you know, the anger is okay, but what you do with it is another thing, and we need to give you some tools and how to deal with what you're feeling. I understand, you know, it's a tough time right now, or you may be having a tough time. Normalize that for me. But I grew up in the same little town my whole life. So when I married the military fella, I had no clue what I was getting myself in for. Our first posting, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, it was Saint-Jacques, Service Louis. And I still don't know that. I used to dream in French, but I couldn't speak it. My life depended on it, I'm sure. And we've moved 11 times, both in the US and in Canada. And he went away on exercise, and he had told me a story, or someone had told me a story about a hand grenade that they were practicing with, went off and killed a soldier. And I can remember thinking, oh my goodness, well, don't touch a hand grenade when you're out there training. What? You need to relax yourself. But that's all I could think about, was even on training exercise, danger is out there. So, and our children know this. Because as I say to all the families that Kelly and Lena work with, little pigs have big ears. So when you're not even expecting them to be listening, they're listening to what we say. So the blended family issue is prevalent in all society. It's just as prevalent in military society. One of the biggest challenges that we face as military families is everywhere we move, we don't really have much choice in where we're going. So family are in one location. I was in Colorado, then I was in California, then we were in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And those are fabulous places to live, but family is in Bancroft for both my husband and I. So there is no leaving little Johnny or going to visit grandma on the weekend. There is none of that for military kids.
Tu sais, si je le dis en français, tu peux peut-être traduire. L'impact des déplacements comme ça pour des familles militaires, y a-t-il un rapprochement ou des liens à faire comme les enfants qui sont pupilles de la couronne puis qui sont déplacés d'un milieu à l'autre au niveau de... Est-ce qu'il y a des moi, je pense peut-être que oui, mais je ne suis pas qualifié du tout.
Can we make a link between military kids and all the movement that's around and Crown Wards kids where they move around and there's no sense of attachment to any places or anybody? So
my experience with children who become Crown Ward of the state, it was called in the US, I'm not sure if it's called the state here in Canada, but when I was working at Children's Treatment Center, I worked with a family where the children were, when I met them, they were in foster care, and the father and the family members around the father were preparing themselves and taking the necessary steps that Children's Aid Society had required of them in order to have the children return to the home. So I worked with the children who had significant trauma, and one of the children in particular, 7-year-old little girl. And she was doing fabulously well in foster care. She had one of the best foster families I think I've ever met. And she was just blossoming, like, beautifully. So I stayed in her life while she was returned to the care of her biological family. And so I saw the changes, and they weren't positive changes that took place. So then she was returned back to foster care. And this is when CAS decided that the process needed to take place for them to go for Crown Wardship. The challenge for the children is that just like military, well, to me it's 10 times worse than military, and I'll be frank in the reasoning why. The foster parents that had the little girl that I worked with, initially, as I said to you, they were fabulous, really, really wonderful, warm, caring, all-encompassing parents that you would need for a child. When the child went back to the home, I want to say it was a duration of probably 3 to 6 months before, of course, breakdown took place and then the children were removed again. That foster family now is not available. So the child is now in foster care in a completely different family. And it wasn't positive. The foster family were good, they were very good, but they weren't what the child needed. The child really needed, and when she would come to my office, she would cry because she missed her foster mother so much from the previous foster care. So I think it was less scary for her to leave her home, her biological home, to go to foster care because she thought she was going to the previous foster family. She was not. We did go through the court process with her and her brothers, and they did become Crown wards, and so then they would be put for adoption. At that point, I lost track because I was moved, and I know that she periodically is still seen at the Children's Treatment Center, so that's the continuity. There has to be some continuity, and I'll tell you something that I think is hugely important in your profession as teachers. Your relationship that you make with these children is sometimes one of the most important ones in their lives. I grew up in a very chaotic family with a lot of alcoholism and fighting and a lot of the domestic violence that I talk about with the children I treat. My teachers in school were my salvation. They were normal, okay? They didn't yell and scream and lose their temper. They took care of the children. They gave me positive regard. They were my cheerleaders. Huh? So the impact that you as teachers have on these children on a day-to-day basis parallels nothing else. Because I will tell you, children need one place of safety, just like adults do, quite frankly. Because we can handle crazy land at work if home is stable and feels safe, huh? Children, if school feels safe and not crazy land, they can handle all kinds of crazy land at home. And they often do. So please no pressure there, by the way. But again, your level of stability that you provide, the love and care that you provide to your involvement that children have going in and out of their biological home and into foster care and then back into the biological home, and that whole process, hugely challenging for children, especially younger children. Older children, they get oppositional because it hurts them, and then they get angry, then they become oppositional and a bit hardened by that process.
Or they become indifferent.
Seemingly.
Seemingly different, because I'm former Army brat, so for me moving around, becoming friends with someone, I didn't have best friends because I thought, what's the point? I'm moving anyways in a couple of years, so.
Yeah.
So that's how I lived
Yeah.
as I grew older.
Yeah.
So best friends, never really had any. Had friends,
Yeah.
not too close.
Not
because I
too-
knew I was leaving anyways.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to get too attached because it hurts too much.
Absolutely.
Leave.
Absolutely. It's a bit sad though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because as a military spouse, I kind of got a bit like that as well.
Mhm.
Because why go out and make friends if I'm only here 2 years, I'll tough it through and away I go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not the best way to be, but it's good insight to know that maybe you have a bit of a guard there. And absolutely children do, because children become quite good at being resilient. They are very resilient. But it doesn't mean we say, oh, well, whatever, you'll be good, you're resilient. Well, they can't bounce back from everything on their own. That's why we adults are in their lives. This. Please assist them to see their own personal value. Please assist them. Use strengths-based reinforcements. In other words, we often talk to children about choices. Okay, so you did that, and then what happened? They tell you, okay, so could you have made a different choice? Yeah. What other choice could you make? They can tell you, smart as could be. Most of them, almost all of them, can tell you what they maybe should have done in the process. So you just build on that awareness, you build on that strength. Look at mistakes as being learning opportunities. No shame. Who can tell me the difference between guilt and shame? Anybody know the difference? Is one better or worse than the other?
Shame is worse, I guess.
Shame is worse. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did a bad thing. So, guilt is okay. If we make too much of a deal about what I did wrong, you need to own what you did wrong. If you kicked little Johnny in the playground and you hurt him and made him cry, you must understand that your behavior was not okay. That's not okay. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. You did a bad thing. And you know how back in the day we got really smart about saying because people used to say, you're so stupid. Why did you do that? You're so stupid. No, that causes shame. Because it says, I'm stupid, Brenda's stupid. You did that, that was not a good thing to do. That causes guilt. We have to be very, 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 very cautious with children not to cause shame. They don't learn from shame, by the way. They take it in and it sits there with them. And it's not a good thing. Encourage and support individual differences as valued characteristics. This course reduces bullying because if everybody is allowed to be different, and we encourage everybody to be different because we all are different, so that's a good thing. And that starts with adults, by the way, not with children. Be aware of changes in the child's behavior. So this is what I talked about earlier when you're noticing or you have any kind of concern about any of the diagnosis I spoke about earlier. This is the piece that I want you to remember about that. I want you to just note that if there's changes in behaviors or characteristics in a child, those are the times when you take note of that. I say to all my staff is, reporting is sometimes what we have to do for the betterment of the child and the family, quite frankly. I always say sometimes this is the catalyst to getting the family the help they really need to make them better and safer for the children. So it doesn't have to be viewed as a negative thing. It can be viewed as a very positive thing. Anybody read the book called The Boy Called It? The school really, really failed him because the school was afraid of his mother. And then the children, it was in the US, so it was DHS, Department of Human Services, which is like CAS here. They failed him too. He was failed many, 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 many places. And so what I want you to do is I want you to cross your feet at the ankle. Look at you, you're also compliant. I love it. I want you to put your hands out in front of you, thumbs up. Cross them over, turn them over, thumbs down. Make sure to change your finger. I know, here's a test. And then bring them up in front of you. Okay. Close enough. So we have to laugh at ourselves, huh? Okay. Chair as it's holding your entire body. And I'm going to ask you to take a nice deep breath in and hold it and then release, and we'll do that together. And I want you to puff your belly out, your lower belly out. Nobody's looking. I want you to puff your belly out. Push all the air out. And take another deep breath in.
impact their mental health. So all the stuff that Brendan talked about, especially kids with ADHD and ASD, military lifestyle can be very challenging for them. There's levels of operational, what I'm looking for, operational tempo on the base changes frequently, so there's sometimes a lot of stress at home, sometimes there's not. They have frequent separations from one or both parents in some instances. We have a lot of dual military families on this base. Militaries will deploy people together. They try not to, but it happens. So then, oftentimes other caregivers need to be brought in, which creates additional stress. And there's often frequent shifts in family dynamics, right? Which changes how parenting happens, who's doing the parenting. And oftentimes what I see in a family where there are still two parents is that there's a lot of issues around, this one's a very soft parent, this one's an authoritarian parent, and the child doesn't know from 1 month to the next what the expectations are in the family, having that lifestyle, right? And so I think as teachers, I like to really talk to you about the fact that, a lot of these kids, it fosters maturity. It encourages independence. Military kids, one thing they're usually really good at is being flexible and dealing with change. And oftentimes it strengthens family bonds. A lot of kids say to me that because they only see their grandparents once or twice a year, they really love that relationship. It's more important to them than a kid that just kind of sees grandma, grandpa every day and takes that for granted. So in Trenton, we have kind of some weird, So in Trenton, we have some kind of unique deployments. I am a Navy wife, so I'm used to my husband being gone 10 out of 12 months a year, and that's kind of the way my family was raised. That's normal for us. Army bases, it's usually the entire brigade leaves for 6 months, they're gone for 6 months, they come back, and then they're home for about 1.5 years. So things settle back down on the base. The kids, they've had another 100 kids whose parents are deployed at the same time. Trenton, we don't have that a lot. So in Trenton, we have a lot of, they're gone for 2 weeks, they're home for 2 weeks, they leave again. We have a lot of, we're not doing them as much now, but I think you'll see them pick up again. We did what was called 56-day rotos. So parents were gone 56 days, home 56, and there was a cycle of 3 of those. So in a year, the parent was gone for half of it, but it wasn't, I'm leaving for 6 months so we can go through these cycles of deployment, and then I come home and we can readjust again. It was operational stress injuries. People are diagnosed with those who have never stepped foot in Afghanistan. It affects children because the parent that they knew is often not the parent they get back. So this parent who may have been patient, kind before, maybe angry, maybe not the same person, right? And so this affects kids because they don't understand. And what do kids do? Kids internalize everything, right? It's all about them. So everything is their fault. So they see this huge change in a parent and they think they've done something wrong. So it's really important that parents communicate with staff that they have maybe a diagnosis of PTSD. That's not going to happen very often, right? So it's you being cognizant of that there could be a reason why this child is behaving. Did you want to drop in because you're the trauma pro there?
I'm the trauma person.
Yeah.
One of the things I just saw this, Kelly's partner is Barry Doherty, and he does our deployment services for adults in the family. Kelly helps with the children piece. And Barry brought this movie to my attention. It's called Children of Soldiers. And
for them, it wasn't that big of a deal. I have other kids that I talk to who are like 8, and they've been on 9-10 schools. So it just depends on kind of what's going on with the parents' trade. Moves can happen quickly. We don't often get a lot of notice. My shortest notice, and you've probably had short ones too, but my shortest notice has been 8 weeks. And we moved in May. When we moved here, we arrived here on May the 31st. That was hard for my kids. They couldn't finish their school year in Halifax. They needed my spouse here, so we couldn't get